In today's video, we delve into why Bitcoin and the entire crypto market must inevitably rise in the coming days and weeks. I have set specific as examples and also have concrete data that has just arrived. So indeed, quite a bit has happened in the last few days. In today's video, I will discuss specific examples and also reference values from the past. Additionally, we have received new data, also in the general macroeconomic environment. So we will address specific points here. Make sure to stay tuned until the end so that you fully understand the overall picture, because only with this information can you remain completely relaxed in the current market environment. I know it's very turbulent and especially very uncertain at the moment, but if you rely on the right data, you can definitely navigate the current market completely relaxed. If you like such videos, feel free to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the other videos that will be released in the coming days. Now let's talk about the specific points. You definitely know this overview from the last YouTube videos, which scenarios are currently ahead of us. At the moment, the bull run is completely intact. In my opinion, the current cycle is still very much in its early stages. We've probably only seen 20% of what is yet to come. We've only seen a single leg up since the last all-time high. It was significantly different in the other cycles. Back then, we saw a push upwards much more frequently. A total of 4 or 5, so 4 or 5 wave-like pushes upwards. And in this cycle, we've only seen a single push upwards so far, and this is due to the global liquidity and the monetary policy environment. And that's also the core of today's video. What is extremely important to me is that you understand the principle behind this, so that you can be completely relaxed even in the current market phase, because we have indeed received new data regarding global liquidity. We have reached a new all-time high, and this has actually only happened since the beginning of March, and accordingly, only since the beginning of March 2025, as indicated here in green. And just recently, in the last week, we've seen another good push. I know in this case it doesn't look like much, but it is actually quite significant because we're not talking about small movements, purely crypto intrinsic, but rather about the M2 money supply, essentially the total capital calculated worldwide. And here we can quite clearly see that we need to see an expansion for Bitcoin to gain traction. This can also be viewed in the same way. The entire behavior and dependency on global liquidity and Bitcoin can also be very well observed in the current cycle. We have repeatedly seen a time lag of 75 days. First, global liquidity rises in white, and then Bitcoin follows in orange. So we have seen this principle very often, even in this cycle, and this is now coming into play. Again, on a very overarching level and concerning the cycle itself. And we actually have relatively good reference values from the last cycle. So especially in this area, the altcoin season took place from the cycle of 2017-2018. In this case, it was also the interim peak of global liquidity. And then it took until 2019, so almost 2 years, for global liquidity to reach a new all-time high, with a retest at the upper edge. And in this case, that was also the ultimate bottom. Yes, the bear market bottom, or March 2020, during the COVID pandemic, which we can recognize here. And then we also saw this parabolic upswing here, only afterwards, once the expansion of global liquidity took place again. And I simply recognize this exact scenario, again at the current time. We have the bull run of 2021, also 2022. We saw the ultimate all-time high. In this case, the altcoin season also took place here. Then we also saw the top in global liquidity here. And then it took over 2 years in this case, until we saw a new all-time high in global liquidity here again. Then the retest came, and it only took place in December 24-25, so we can accordingly assume a continuation from this point. And I compare the whole thing quite well with this point, where we saw another radical crash here. As mentioned, in that case, it was the C pandemic that took place back then, and in this case, it is now the tariffs from Trump that have caused market uncertainty, which was then the retest of global liquidity. So the scenarios are very, very similar, and the whole thing can also be perfectly explained by how the cycles generally play out. You have to imagine, from this high, yes, to this high, which then took place about 2.5 years later, the Bitcoin price did exactly nothing. So we see a value here of just under 70,000 US dollars, and the entire price range was also at just under 70,000 US dollars. So we have a direct correlation here between global liquidity and the Bitcoin price, or the general cyclical behavior that we can recognize. And that's why I am sure that a continuation will occur, or rather must occur. Yes, so in my opinion, this is completely beyond question, because it's almost like a law of nature that when an expansion occurs, the liquidity eventually reaches the crypto market with a time delay. So we saw exactly this behavior here, that always 75 days later, after the bottom was reached, in global liquidity, an expansion occurred again, and accordingly, Bitcoin followed suit. And we are seeing this again now if we zoom in, that new all-time highs are currently happening. And this makes me personally extremely bullish, which is why I'm not worried at all at the moment that the bull run is over, or that there won't be an altcoin season, or that crypto in general will enter a bear market or anything like that. In my opinion, it makes absolutely no sense, and this can be relatively easily justified based on the current Dixie. So I have prepared the chart again, which gives a relatively good insight into the area we are currently in. And in this regard, I would like to refer to reference values from the last cycles that took place. Once the bull run of 2017, marked here, because you need to keep one key thing in mind, or rather, one thing is important to understand. A weak US dollar index is always very good for risk-on assets in general. And risk-on assets are logically cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, altcoins, but also, for example, some tech stocks or similar. And here, exactly the opposite is the risk-off mode, meaning a strong US dollar index is very bad for cryptocurrencies in general, for tech stocks, and consequently also for stocks in general. And the whole thing can be explained relatively easily if you overlay the Bitcoin chart on this US dollar index chart, TO, and then you can see quite well that every time there was a weak US dollar. So we also saw the tops here in the 2017 bull run. A weak US dollar was, in this case, the bull run top of 2017. A weak US dollar was exactly here. Also here, the double top that we saw with Bitcoin. I can also highlight it in color again so that you can recognize it, shown once in yellow, here, and then you can definitely see the dependency clearly. And by the way, this can be applied exactly the same way in another area. When we saw this small spike in the US dollar index, it was also the ultimate bottom here, which in this case was again the C pandemic, meaning the pandemic crash that occurred. And in this case, it was also a local high here. And we saw it the same way in the current cycle. We saw the FTX crash here. November, December 2022 was also the peak of the US dollar index here. Yes, and what do we see at the current moment? We see another peak in the US dollar index, but in this case, Bitcoin has actually held up surprisingly well. And personally, I don't want to know what will happen if we reach new lows here. So if the US dollar index reaches new bottom levels, I can roughly draw another blue box here. In my opinion, that will be the starting signal, or the peak of the whole thing then, for the next bull run, or in 2025, 2026. Personally, I also believe that the general cycle has shifted somewhat, simply due to all the turmoil, due to all the trade tariffs that Trump has now imposed. You just have to deal with it. It is a different market environment than what we have seen in the last cycles, but still, the general parameters and the general gears in this big clockwork still function exactly the same. So there are simply certain rules in this market, and if you adhere to these rules, or if certain factors occur, then we have clear conclusions, then we have clear chain reactions that take place again. If you understand how these individual gears interlock, then I would say it is relatively relaxed at the current time, because you can precisely estimate what will happen approximately when. Of course, I personally do not have a crystal ball either. I am aware of that, and I also do not want to present myself as if I know exactly what will happen. At the end of the day, I also have no idea when exactly what will occur, but if you can still understand and comprehend these individual factors, it is still very manageable to foresee what will happen. And that is why I am personally firmly convinced that the majority of the bull run in 2025-26 is yet to come. We might also see a small breakout here concerning Bitcoin from this falling wedge. The 50-day SMA is still intact. We have not yet seen a structural break from the last interim high. These are all indications that this cycle is still intact. Sakmas emalhais anas so in the persistency and that we can still expect new highs to be reached. And only then, when we see an extremely weak US dollar, when we reach new bottom levels here, when we see something similar to 2021 or 2017, can we assume that the cycle is truly coming to an end, or reaching its peak. The same applies, by the way, to global liquidity. Only when we see a strong expansion here will we truly see this parabolic upswing in Bitcoin. And I can well imagine that we could reach prices of 150,000 US dollars. In my opinion, that is more than realistic. You have to imagine each individual leg up in Bitcoin so far has been about 80 to 100%. If we look here, the pump in this case was nearly 90%. The next pump that occurred, from the low point to the high point, was approximately 117%. And in this case, if we take the low point, to the next high point again, we can also assume that between 80 and 100% will occur, in my opinion. That would be approximately 140 to 150,000 US dollars for Bitcoin. And precisely only then, when Bitcoin enters the overheated area, meaning when Bitcoin leaves its fair value zone, only then can the rollover from Bitcoin to altcoins truly occur, so that the baton is passed and more liquidity flows into altcoins. This is also related to the general monetary policy situation. This, in turn, depends, for example, on whether QT is stopped, how many interest rate cuts are priced in, and so on and so forth. However, I don't want to cover all of that again in this video. You are welcome to watch the other videos, or additional videos that will be released in the coming days, so feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, if you want to take advantage of the big current opportunity, including the current breakout that Bitcoin is experiencing, you can also take advantage of the promotion I currently have with CoinW. You currently have the opportunity to snag up to 3,000 USDT. Depending on how much trading volume you generate, you will receive a bonus here, so just make a deposit. And once you have executed some trades and reached a certain volume, the bonus will be credited to you. That's definitely how the whole thing works. By the way, I have also opened a new Telegram group together with CoinW, my new partner. There you will definitely find more market updates. You'll definitely always be up to date there. I also post approaches there that I cover in the YouTube videos. You also have the opportunity to execute certain scalp and swing trades, so you will continuously receive trade setups suggested by 4 professional analysts. Especially for beginners, it's optimal to find an entry point here. Of course, still be cautious, but I've definitely linked everything in the video description. It's completely free to join here. You just need a CoinW account, and then you can join here, completely for free. As mentioned, several analyses are always prepared. You also receive updates from my side, so you are definitely fully and completely taken care of there, free of charge, so you are informed in that regard. Otherwise, that's it for today's YouTube video. I definitely hope you understood how the whole principle works, how we have individual components here, like the US dollar index, which in turn provides more liquidity in the markets. And we are seeing exactly this behavior at the current time. We are witnessing an expansion of global liquidity, and the last time we had a pump of 4% in global liquidity, we also saw a pump of over 100% in Bitcoin. And I don't want to imagine what might happen now. With a pump of 4.8% fast in global liquidity, it is quite possible that we could see another 60 to 80% increase, or even more in Bitcoin, which would suggest new all-time highs. That is definitely my current approach. Definitely write your opinion in the comments. Personally, I am very relaxed at the current moment, because it is quite manageable how the process is unfolding, and it is important to me to present the whole thing here on the YouTube channel so that you can benefit from the information accordingly. Otherwise, I sincerely thank you for your attention, and we'll see each other again in the next video.